อ Hello, in today's video we're going to be covering lubricating the motion system on your 3D printer. Should you use grease? Should you use oil? And how should you apply it? We're going to go over some common questions and go over some of the methods that I've been using that I found worked quite well. I'm going to be passing this information on to you. So let's get started. So first thing I'm going to go over, there are manufacturer recommendations for certain systems. So for example, on MGN Carriages from Highwind, they recommend Mobilux EP1 grease. Now, do you have to use Mobil 1 EP1 grease? I'll touch on that later. And also the method of applying these lubricants will vary. Now, I got a feeling I'm going to get a ton of comments on this video that I'm doing it wrong, or this is the correct way of doing it, or so-and-so paper about this product says you should be doing it this way. We're just going to take a step back and acknowledge the fact. This is a 3D printer. The actual loads on most of the motion systems that 3D printers use are well below their maximum rated load capability, especially when it comes to something such as linear rails. So while some of the methods I may cover may not be the most optimal, or I might not be using the most perfect lubricant for the application, it's a 3D printer. For the most part, as long as it's grease or oiled, it should be okay. So first off, grease or oil, what should you be using? You'll see some people recommend grease, some recommend oil. Personally, I recommend using grease. Grease I find lasts longer than oil. Oil has a tendency to wear out relatively quickly, and with grease I find once you pack the bearings properly, it lasts quite a while and also acts as a little bit better for noise reduction in some of the louder motion systems. Now, what kind of grease should you be using? Well, if you look at the manufacturer, like for example Highwind, they'll recommend a specific grease. However, what I've found from testing and speaking to others, as long as you're using a grease that is NLG0 or NLG1 rated, and that is how thick the grease is itself, you should be okay. Now, I normally use white lithium-based grease. A lot of people prefer PTFE-based grease. As long as you're not using any grease that has any sort of additive that may be abrasive to ball bearings, for example, you should be okay with a NLG1 or NLG0 rated grease for most applications. These are 3D printers. They're not in high force environments. They're not in high temperature environments. So I use everything from spray-on white lithium grease to some Super Lube PTFE based grease, and for the longest time I've been using also this tube here of Mobil SHC PM460 synthetic grease. It's an official lubricant of NASCAR, NLG 1.5, so it's a little bit thicker, but I like it on my lead screws. So you'll find most off-the-shelf greases are sufficient for 3D printer application. Trick is, how do you actually get the grease properly applied to your rods, bearings, and lead screws? Let's take a look at this on the desk. Okay, so let's start on the bench here, and we're going to take a look starting off with lead screws. Now with lead screws, these are the easiest ones to lubricate. And you know what? Sometimes you just kind of apply it to, this will help lubricate these just the same way. Fill it up. You don't need to fill it up, but you do need to get a good amount in there. Any excess will ooze out. Put your finger over the other end or your thumb, and this will hopefully seal the other end. And then you're going to take your rod and you're going to push it into the bearing. And you're going to push until you feel the resistance, and you should see some come out the other end, and this will mean that it's packed. At that point, make sure you have some paper towels or rag handy. So what you did there, by forcing it close and pushing the rod into it, you forced all the grease to flow into the channels where the ball bearings run, properly packing the bearing with grease. So this is going to ensure that you have a good amount of grease in the motion system, and everything should stay properly lubricated. And what you could do at this time is, before final assembly, just clean off any excess grease again to prevent gunk buildup in use, because really the only grease that matters is the grease that's in the system. Now another tip is, when you are final assembly, take a look at where the bearing runs are. Hopefully you can catch them here. You should see 4 of them, okay? Now when you're assembling, say you're building your printer on this bench here, and your bed is going to move in this direction. You're going to want your bearings orientated in an X pattern or a box pattern. So you want your bearings like that and like that, or a box, so it makes a box. You don't want your bearings in a way where you have a cross, okay? So when you put your rod on and you assemble it in your printer, you want it so that you have a bearing set here and here and here and here for motion going this way. Same thing with vertical. You don't want your bearings up top and the bottom. Remember, gravity is a thing, and there will be ever so slight amount of slop in the system. It's not going to be perfect. So if your bearings are arranged that you have a guide on them. Now, again, you can't just take grease, put it on the rail, and hope to move the carriage over and lubricate it properly. This red plastic rubber piece you see here is a wiper. This is going to prevent any grease or oil or grit from getting at the ball bearings. It's to help keep it contained and keep it clean. So we're going to have to get the grease onto the ball bearings another way. Now, on some carriages, they do have a grease port. This is more common on the higher end carriages. However, on lower end ones, you may think you have a grease port. So let's take a look at this one here. And this has the wiper removed, and you can see that hole there. And so you may think that's a grease port, but if we were to take it apart, that hole doesn't really go anywhere. So on some carriages, you may actually have a grease port, and on some you do not. So an easy way to tell if you actually have a grease port or not, on some of the higher end ones, they actually have a grease nipple there. Others just have a hole. And what you're going to want to use is a large gauge needle with a blunt tip. Now, unfortunately, I can't find one. I bought one a while ago and I can't find it. So I'm using a kid's medicine dropper as kind of a substitute right now. And it's filled with some grease. And while this won't be a perfect application, if you try to force grease in, if it goes in, the hole may lead somewhere. If it doesn't go in anywhere, odds are it's a blind hole. It's not going anywhere. You could disassemble it to check, or you could just not risk losing all these ball bearings and having to reball your carriage. Say we didn't luck out, this hole leads nowhere, we can't grease it through a grease port. How are we going to lubricate the ball bearings? The easiest way is to flip it over, and then you can see you have a gap here. Now it's not a large gap, and this is why you want that needle, that large gauge blunt needle, to force the grease into there. But essentially, you're just going to force the grease in. Try and use like your finger to really ensure that the grease gets forced into the bearings themselves, and then move it around, maybe apply again, move it around again, and keep doing this until you get as much grease as you're satisfied with getting into the motion system. And then of course, wipe off the excess. Now another option, and this is something that I've been doing more and more lately with linear rails and carriages here, is use spray grease. So right here This is some spray-on white lithium grease. The PTF grease is apparently better, it lasts a little bit longer, but this is what I have right now. And this makes it a lot simpler because for these tight holes here, especially in carriages, like this MGM7 carriage and rail here, there really is not a lot of room there to get grease in. So when you're dealing with a tighter spot you're trying to get grease into, using spray grease, just kind of spraying it and letting it soak in, move it around. This can make things a lot easier, a lot more hassle-free than fiddling around with some of the thicker greases. Now, I do have a couple machines that I've greased up like with this stuff, and they're still going on quite well months to weeks later. I'm not noticing any issues with lubrication on the rails, so it is holding up pretty well. Now, as always, anytime you're handling any grease or lubricant, you are going to be wanting to wear gloves. You don't really want this stuff all over your hands, or especially on your clothes. That's usually not a good idea. And then also, a question I do get asked often is, mine came oiled from the factory. I don't even need to grease them. No, that is wrong. Now, when these are brand new, you will see a lot of the time they do come with oil on them, but usually that is just a rust preventative oil. Now, linear rails here, unless they are stainless steel, they're just steel. So after you grease and lubricate them, you are going to want to actually keep the rails themselves a little wet. Either, wipe off the excess grease, but don't actually clean it off with like ISO and just leave a thin coat on it, or spray some form of rust preventative like WD-40 on the rails to prevent them from rusting. But the actual oil that comes on them when you purchase the rails is a rust preventative oil. It is not a lubrication oil. So you're going to want to clean your carriages first before applying oil. Easiest way to clean them, if you have, for example, a ultrasonic bath, take your carriages, put them on a holder such as this. You can print holders like this, zip time together so they don't fall apart. Put them in a plastic baggie with some isopropyl alcohol. Put the baggie in your ultrasonic cleaner. Fill the rest with water. Putting them in the baggie makes it so you don't have to use as much isopropyl to clean them. And then let it run for a couple minutes, and that should clean your carriages quite well. And then just wipe down the rails before greasing them up. Now, not everyone has an ultrasonic cleaner, of course, so how do you clean your bearings and your carriages without an ultrasonic cleaner? Well, you flush them clean as best you can. So using something like isopropyl alcohol or a degreaser or light cleaner of some sort, something that won't harm the plastics or discolor the metals, for example. And what you do is you just flush out the rust prevention oil, and this can also flush out any grit that still may be in the carriage and the ball bearing runways from manufacturing. Now, it used to be that these linear rails, especially the ones from AliExpress in China, the lower priced ones used to be pretty gritty from the factory, but over the past couple of years, they've definitely improved in quality. So now most of the time, a quick flush just to ensure that you're getting out all the rust prevention oil and any potential dust or grit before greasing them up is really all you need to do. The same with the bearings. You can soak them in ISO and then fill them with a cleaner of some sort, run them over the rod, and this just kind of circulates everything, make sure everything gets flushed out as best you can. Now, of course, the methods that I've covered in the video aren't the only way you can go about greasing up your rails, your linear bearings, your lead screws, for example. There's other methods. I'm sure there will be some people that don't agree with my method.
lubrication for the rails. Thanks a lot, man.
I just realized at this point in time that I don't have lubrication for my linear guide rails, so I am not going to be able to continue with that tonight. I'm thinking about making the feet instead. That is awesome. That is really awesome. Yeah, well, according to the manual, it's saying that whatever lubricant on it is it's not really a lubricant, it's a shipping agent which prevents it from rusting. So you're supposed to clean the rails and then apply either a PTFE based oil or like a lubricant for it, and there's specific types. I just literally just watched a video for it. It's supposed to be a 0 or 1 lubricant. Sure, fair enough. The fact of the matter is that, like, I appreciate the feedback, and you know, even though there's something as simple as like a CAN bus that I can install, it's what the team has told me is that it's best to just make it stock. Like, pay attention to the pay attention to the guide, follow it, ask if there's any questions and things like that. But yeah, so I'm actually going to not be installing these tonight. I am looking at the possibility of skipping that over and instead working on the bottom panel, the din rails, and the what are these? The 4 legs there, the belt drive assemblies. So yeah, listen, like, if you're planning to build a like a 2.4, go ahead. I've used Enders a few times. I have right before I bought this kit, I had purchased an Anycubic Cobra Max, which was decent, but it wasn't. It didn't, like, I'll show you. I printed these on my Ultimaker, which is like a 10-year-old machine, and I printed these on my brand new Anycubic. The difference between them, you see they're stringing because this one is actually in PETG and this one's just PLA. But if you notice closely here, what camera am I on? Oh, sorry, I was on a top view. I was talking directly to the these ones I printed on my Ultimaker. They're like super stringy, but understandably because it's PETG, this one's PLA. If you notice, inside the hexagon, it's very sharp. Like the Ultimaker, it's a Core XY, it prints like really well. Whereas on the Anycubic, they're slightly rounded on the inside corners. So the parts that I printed that clip into this, they clip in my 10-year-old Ultimaker, but not in the Anycubic. So that's why I returned it, and I picked up another Core XY machine. Now, granted, I could have probably picked up 6 Ender 3s for the price of this machine, but why not, right? Okay, yeah, I don't even have thread locker. Oy. These guys are M3x4.